with our special music to give the choir a Sunday off, and our music director, John Stafford, to be at the National Association of Choir Directors in Minneapolis this weekend. This picture will not surprise many of you. To discover where that is, anybody want to take a guess as to where this picture come from? 8:30 people don't count. You count. You count. You just don't get to answer. Anybody want to guess where that is? No? Arizona, says the ones who used to live in Arizona. Arizona in a national park. Many of you know, if you worship with us regularly, that I most generally find myself, and I discover God sometimes most clearly in a national park. And it's been at least a month since I had a national park story, so I'm overdue. This week 2 icon is taken from our collection in the gallery by our Lenten artist, Andy Julo, and he took this photo in Saguaro National Park, the day after the November election. And it seems only natural to pair this icon of an ancient drawing that is also on the cover of your bulletin, this ancient drawing that is found out in the desert wilderness, to pair that with a story of Jesus also out in the wilderness. And in Saguaro National Park, there are many of these ancient drawings. Some people call them painted rocks. They're not actually painted, or not all of them. Some of them are. Some of them are actually carved into the rocks, and they are very ancient. And they are amazing to see in person. And I have not seen this one particularly, but I did get to see some of its sister drawings just on the other side of the park while I was on retreat at the Redemptorist Retreat Center, adjacent to the national park. One might say that I was led by the Spirit out into the wilderness on those days. I was by myself, and I went for a walk one morning, the very first morning, to find these picture rocks. They are right at the edge of the retreat center property before you go through the gate into the trail for the park. And I sat there. I don't even know how long I sat there and looked at these ancient icons carved and painted onto these ancient stones. And I couldn't help but think about how generation after generation after generation of people had used these images as guides as they wandered among the sacred wilderness of the great saguaro cactus. Now, my commitment to myself was to hike every morning in the park after breakfast. And I had to walk by the picture rocks each and every day. And so I asked the ancient spirits who had wandered through that forest for generations to wander with me. During this time, and really throughout my life, walking or running, when I was younger anyway, is as much a spiritual practice as it is anything for me. It's not just about exercise. And that was especially true during this retreat and during these particular wanderings. The wanderings were as much a physical symbol of my journey of faith, providing time and space to connect with God and with myself. to learn about my strengths and my limitations, to learn about paying attention to where one is going and where one has been. And that was certainly true over my week alone in the desert. One day I went out wandering on the trail. I was on the trail, and yet I missed a sign and I got lost. Very lost. Journal entry 1. Pay attention. The signs are all around you. Pay attention. The next day, again, out on the trail, I came to a fork in the road. And I had to choose a path, and I chose the one that, after thinking about it, I really thought was right. Wrong. After about a half a mile or so, I realized I was wrong. I turned around, went back. Journal entry 2. What lessons are my mistakes teaching me? On one of the last days I was there, much to my husband's dismay later, it was one of those situations, where it's easier to ask for forgiveness and, you know what I mean? I only told him after. I climbed the very tallest peak in the park, Wasson's Peak. And it was February. And you may think southern Arizona in February is like 90 degrees or something. Not when you get to the top of Wasson's Peak. And there was snow, and there was ice, and the path got very narrow. And I got to the top of Wasson Peak, and I just sat there. And I was cold. And I didn't pack enough snacks. We talked last week about packing the snacks. I hadn't packed enough snacks, and I wasn't sure I had enough water, but there I sat, hungry, cold, and alone. But I wasn't really alone. And I won't go so far as to call this week in the desert a vision quest, as many of the native and ancient peoples do. I won't call it a vision quest because I ate my meals provided by the center. I slept in a very nice bed. I had a comfy chair and a shower in my room, and they gave me a glass of wine with my dinner every night. It was lovely. And there was certainly a spiritual awakening. And I'll be honest, it was a bit scary. One would have been foolish not to have been a bit scared up at the top of Wasson Peak in the snow and the ice and totally by yourself without cell service. It was a bit scary, but I suppose searching for the divine creator of the universe ought to be a bit scary. And if it isn't a bit scary, maybe we've forgotten the power and the magnitude of the divine creator of the universe. And I can't help but wonder what Jesus went out to learn in the wilderness. I can't help but wonder if he was a bit scared at this crossroads of his life, this time where he went out in personal solitude, marking a significant life transition. That's why I had Amy read that last little verse of chapter 3, so you could understand what had happened right before this. Immediately, I did not skip any verses there. Immediately after this baptism experience, where at least for the Gospel of Matthew, not true in all the Gospels, but in this Gospel, during Jesus' baptism, this voice comes out to all and says, "This is my Son, my beloved." Now, I don't know about you, but I would think that after such an experience, Jesus must have needed a little quiet time to process all of that. Anytime we have a big moment, some sort of transformational experience, some sort of question we're trying to sort out, choosing which path. We need a little time to process, to ask the questions of the heart. I wonder if Jesus went out there to search his own soul and even for a moment have some understanding of where he was headed on this journey. And over the last week or so, as I've been thinking and praying about this passage and thinking about my own experience in the wandering in the desert and about this magnificent icon, I can't help but think that humans, well, we know humans have been searching for meaning beyond ourselves and within themselves forever. This spiritual journey, this wandering, has been important for generations, and I can't help but wonder, I'm wondering a lot this morning, I can't help but wonder as I continue to learn my own ways of connecting with the divine source. I'm wondering if modern religion isn't actually all that helpful to the process. 21st century church, I mean. I wonder if we get too focused on what hymns we sing or what kind of chairs we have or what committees we're working on or navigating magnificent, expensive buildings. I'm wondering if those aren't temptations and distractions from what we really ought to be focusing on, and that is the divine connection that we have with the Creator of the universe, walking the spiritual path toward finding ourself and our God. What's distracting you these days? Whether it's here within this community of faith or with your own spiritual path, what temptations crop up to keep you from seeing the signs, distracting you, hurrying you along, distracted, tempted? It's not just the 21st century church. The great mystic from the 16th century who has been a spiritual teacher for me for at least a decade now, Teresa of Avila, says, any time we enter authentically in search of the divine, there will be distractions and temptations. Teresa wrote a book in 1577 about one of her visions. And this vision was about, as she describes it, the interior castle. She offers this incredible insight into how she understands the spiritual journey. That there is inside of each of our souls this interior castle, sort of like this, with concentric chambers, one inside the other, leading ever closer to the center where the divine energy lives, shines its light, gives its warmth, shares the love. In Teresa's book, I might add, there are 7 chambers. And if you count carefully, there are 7 turns in the labyrinth. Teresa reminds seekers of God for over 500 years now that the more we try, because we do, to look for God on the outside, to look for ourselves in the world, the further we get from ourselves and our God. The more we look somewhere else, the less successful we will be. The The spiritual journey isn't out there, you see. It's in here. And the beloved teacher, Teresa, says that the doorway in here is quiet and prayer. She says you can't open the door otherwise. And that's hard for a lot of us. It's hard for so many of us. Because that quiet can be scary. Some of you are getting itchy right now, waiting on me to go on. Did she lose her place? Did she lose a whole page? No. It's also scary, Teresa says, because it's dark. The entrance to the soul can often be dark for several reasons. One, we are on the outside and we have not yet really started, and so it is the farthest from the divine light. And so it's hard to see, and we must trust so completely because we're making our way in the dark, knowing that we are walking toward the light. And it's also scary because she says there are temptations, certainly. There is a whole host of creatures that she describes in this early part of this little book, whose mission is to distract the soul from its journey. Distractions of all sorts of worldly temptations. Are you hungry? I got a stone. Quiet feels unprotected. It feels scary. And so we fill our days with stuff to distract us. How many apps you got on that little thing? Oh, I got a minute. I'm going to sit here. I could be quiet, or I could troll Facebook. And so when the moments of real temptation and fear and trouble confront us, because they do, all the things that play out in Matthew's gospel here, drawn out of Psalm 91, many of us don't have the deep grounding in prayer, and we feel untethered and uncentered. And we have this story from Jesus, who is clearly grounded and centered. In this time of temptation and anxiety, in these moments of stress and exhaustion and physical need, Jesus was firm in his strength and his hope and his assurance. He quotes the ancient scriptures. He is grounded in those words. When the tempter challenges his path, if you are the Son of God, he says. What had just happened? The voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved." And just a few verses later comes the tempter and says, "If you really are." And I wonder, if Jesus would have drawn a symbol in that wilderness like this one, because in moments like this, when there's no one else around, we have nothing to rely on but our own internal compass, our own interior castle. And we can only face the tempter with courage when we are deeply connected with our belovedness that we know from spending time in the center of the labyrinth, from really spending time with the divine indwelling in us. And it seems that Jesus' story and Teresa's story from 1,500 years later are much the same, in that they symbolize for us the great internal battle that each of us faces. And when you have such stories, it's no wonder that we are so hesitant and reluctant to spend time facing down those demons. It is much safer to stay in your comfy chair in the retreat center with your cup of tea and your glass of wine, where it is warm and safe and cozy. I know I've wandered a bit this morning, but it seemed to fit. And as you wander this Lenten season, perhaps you'll use a labyrinth to help keep you on the path. Use this icon, find one online and print it out. Use a finger, use a crayon, use a marker to help keep you focused on the path, to keep you on track. They're helpful to some. They've clearly been helpful for generations. One of the other benefits to this Lenten journey, to this Lenten season, is that it assures us that the path is safe even when it's scary. But only when we are willing to connect with the center. And I wonder, how are you connecting with the divine creation? What's feeding you? What's feeding you? Maybe it's wandering, maybe it's walking, maybe it's sitting. My hubby does it with music. Others do it through writing and journaling. Others through yoga. I was never more surprised in my life after my daddy's open heart surgery to find that his prayer discipline had become colored pencils and mandalas. Mandalas are another circular ancient tool to guide you in spirit and prayer. What's keeping you from being distracted? What's centering you in God? Whatever it is that you know centers you, how can you do more of that this Lenten season? How can you walk safely on the path so that when the days come, when the tempters face, when the speed bumps, like we talked about last week, are exceptionally large, when the hairpin turns are exceptionally dangerous, how will you know? As Jesus knew. How will you know your belovedness? How will you be able to say, my God, my refuge and my strength, I trust in you? May it be so for us this Lenten season.